works of art is that the art ends up speaking to you afterwards, and the work that really works for me is the work that works that are gifts that keep on giving. That I look at it, and once I've created it, it really doesn't feel like my work, but it's something that I will respond to. Sometimes I'm very underwhelmed by the work that, I get very excited about an idea, very underwhelmed in what turns out, and sometimes I rework it, and sometimes the work that gives me the most struggle is the work that really sort of satisfies me at the end, which is a little bit for me like a metaphor for life. The key issues in my work originally were about love, life, grieving, truth, healing, and especially with truth, I've always been sort of obsessed with with all the different layers of truth and the fact and the belief that there are multiple perspectives. These days, though, there's just so much more that's sort of perplexing that's going on, especially in the last few years, that I've actually lost sleep about it, and therefore, it's hard for me to sort of cut off and just sort of be moved by the beauty that's around, and I'm really conscious that there's something else that's sort of so many problems in the world. It sounds like a cliche, but that's what's in me. My work is really at the moment directed towards a lot of the things that challenge our human existence, and hence the work in the clouds there.
Which is your work?
It's the field guide to clouds. Yes, that's right. It's like
I don't know
clouds.
The names to the
yes, they're ubiquitous. We sort of live around them, but in the end, at the moment, it's all gravitating to one really very serious sort of human annihilation, which is just around us all the time now. So, and it's I've always loved clouds. I've always observed them. I've never painted them. And so this was just, I've always been curious about the terminology that people allocate to them. In the process of doing the work, placed words as if they were floating in the same space. Then they were all sort of Latin words, and the middle one was mushroom, and I found the word fungus, and I thought that was just really, that's a sort of part of the process. I thought that was really sort of effective. So I don't know whether you want to do this right now, Nick, but I actually had a few sort of things I'd like to share about some of the work that I find that was interesting in contemporary art at the moment. You do? Okay. Yep. And I guess I'm just doing this because I had the good fortune to, for the first time, go to the Venice Biennale this summer. I've never been to one, so it was sort of one of the bucket list things that I did. Just a few of the installations of work that really appealed to me. So, as I said, I've said I really like work with a lot of different perspectives that can coexist in the one work, and I'm drawn to work that provokes thought, but I'm even more drawn to work that provokes thought and emotion. So, one artist from the Belgian pavilion that I really enjoyed was Francis Addis. And his installation involved, small, very intimate, figurative paintings to huge sort of video installations of children that play from different cultures. And what it really brought to me was this sort of connection between, children that play and adults at war. It was very powerful, and the fact that he could put these two very different sort of types of works of art together, but they still seem to be very connected. There was sort of something documentary about them, and they were all from diverse cultures, and I kind of really like it when artists sort of steer and go off in different lanes. The other work that was just incredibly moving was the Italian pavilion, a guy called Gianni Maria Tassati. I had a visceral and really immediate reaction to this. I just actually started crying. It was an installation of an industrial set where there's a sweatshop, obviously. It was a factory, fabric making sweatshop where there'd be empty stools and sewing machines and spools were all lying there. It was devoid of humans, but you walked through it, and yet you really felt the presence of the human. And the artist's intention was, I think, was to really sort of set it in sort of industrial era Italy and its rise and collapse and fascism. But for me, it really spoke to the exploitation and the sort of the friction between sort of, capitalism and sustainability. It was also incredibly personal. There was a German artist, Maria Eichhorn, who actually excavated into the German pavilion. She destroyed all the travertine, and you could see the foundations. And it was the foundations of a building that was built for the King of Bavaria in the 30s or something, and then altered by the Nazis. And she coupled that with a guided tour of history of places of rebellion and places of memorial. And it was really restrained, and there was no hype, and you did require more time, and you need to invest in the work itself to really get the emotion in the end. And I was very impressed at how she was able to create this really subtly, rather than putting things into spaces by taking away. And I thought that was just really, really lovely. And in Australia, I'm really looking forward to Lindy's Laura Boros work, which I think sounds really, really fascinating. So that's sort of some of the things that would be interested in contemporary art at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kaye. We'll go on to Teena.
Hi.
How are you, Teena?
Good day.
It's your turn.
Oh, okay. So, I've incorporated poetry and just very proudly won I came second, highly commended in the Mary Gilmore Award. And I'm writing more and more poetry, but still doing my practice. Now, my practice is experimental as anything. And I work in a very different way, the way I process things. For instance, my art, the stump of Albert Namatjira's sacred tree he had in a lot of his paintings. There's a you look at Albert and you see a ghost gum often on the left-hand side of all his paintings, right? Now, as an artist, as my responsibility, I look at world news every morning around the world. What is happening in every country, states, United States now secretly invading Australia with B-52s into an Aboriginal area. I usually, I don't know if you know my art, generally it's always myself. Self-portraiture is my thing. Talking about, unfortunately, subjects like death, death ceremonies, and I'm quite prophetic, which is an unfortunate thing, is that people have often said to me, what you do is almost prophetize. You do a work and it happens to you. You know, like, that's how connected you are with your thoughts and what happens to you physically, emotionally and spiritually. Now, for once, I did this work, which isn't about me, it's about the Honourable Albert Namatjira. It's also about white supremacy, which now, the far right, is on the rise, all over the world. Something really affected me a few years ago. I was making these poles, which I exhibited here, of post-punk poetry on encaustic wax poles. The inside of them started with Jesus. Palms from the street, soaked and wrote. I then did layers of encaustic wax. I did layers of ochre. I did more layers of caustic wax. I scraped it back. I put ancient charcoal from the Northern Territory into it. I scraped it back with black conic crown. In the middle of this work is the centre of my work, a book, an antique book from the 1800s. The history of England, of Britain, sorry. So it has the history of England, right? Inside the work. Now, I was very affected a few years ago. I hear the story that Albert's tree had been burnt down. Who does that? You know, the most sacred friggin' tree burnt to the ground. Now, if that wasn't an act of white supremacy, I don't know what was. I know a lot of people in Alice. I lived in the East Desert at a mission called Santa Teresa Mission. Now, word on the ground here, and I've got R and a family there, and they've all told me this was white supremacy on the rise. Let's burn Albert's tree. Let's get rid of him and his legacy. So, when I was doing this, sorry, going back to the encaustic poles, I chopped off a bit at the bottom. It sat around my house for 2 years. This is my process, right? It's unpredictable, but I looked at this stump for 2 years. And that's going to be a work that I'll do next. I'm not making a work about myself right now. Enough with the sorry caps. I'm doing a work about Albert Namatjira and the horrifying act this was. Right? So, every morning when I watch world news and I see all over the world the rise of the far right, the white supremacy groups targeting us all, you know, pretty much, all of us. All I want is people to be one. I want love to rule. And love is the only way to deal with the sort of invasion that they did this week, quietly, but publicly a little bit, but quietly America invaded the Northern Territory this week with their B-52s, nuclear weapons. We are now a target. What the hell? I might leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you, sweet. Sorry, it's a bit intense, but you know, I am.
Thanks, Teena. Always beautiful to listen to the connectedness of your emotion and spirit through how you perceive the world.
Thank you.
We'll continue with Susan.
I'm a bit like Teena and Kaye. I focus very much on what's going on in the world. Every morning I sort of look at what's going on in America because it's absolutely horrifying when you see, first of all, 6 months ago when the Republicans stopped women from having the abortion which went through, which absolutely horrified me because as soon as that happens, women don't have a voice. You lose your agency and suddenly there's like a roll-on effect. But then you go to places like Iraq, you go to Afghanistan where women now can't go to school, they've got to cover up, they don't have a voice. They are you may as well put them in jail. And regarding what Teena was saying, this day I went to listen to the Uluru Statement of the Heart. I've got actually a work being auctioned off for the Uluru Statement of the Heart.
Congratulations.
But apart from that, when you hear that the children up in the Northern Territory, they've got 400 children from the age of 10 to 14 locked behind prison bars, what the hell is Australia thinking? I mean, if I've got 2 sons and I'm sitting there listening to these elders speaking about their children being locked up and I'm thinking, how would I feel enraged if someone came and took my 12 and my 10-year-old child from me for doing nothing? Because of white colonisation, because the most important thing for human beings to look at where we come from, why we do what we do, our past, our history and our memory. And until we reconcile what's going on in our past, how can anyone move forward and actually feel at all comfortable living in a country like Australia, when you can see there are so many ills going on, even the Yes vote for the Euro Statement of the Heart, yesterday when I was sitting in the audience, they're thinking, will this go through? Will Australians tick a simple yes in a box so that Indigenous have a voice in Parliament? We are still fighting for equality. The First Nations people, all the civilization on this planet, and we have no respect. We don't listen, we don't, you look at climate change, look what's going on in America, you look what's going on in China, all around the world, we're losing our democracy. Anyway, I'm not even talking, a lot of the work, last year, a few years ago, I found out that my grandfather was a convict. He came over with his brother. They came over in 1830 and they were about to be hung in England, and they ended up on a boat in Australia. And so I've been looking back at my history to work out where I come from. My father's grandmother was the daughter of a convict. So I've been looking back at all the treatment, and I'm looking at from the other side of the treatment of the convict women. I'm working on a series at the moment. I've just painted very large paintings of every convict woman that was hanged in Australia since 1889. The treatment of these women, and the appalling treatment, the Indigenous population were horrified at the behaviour of the British, even towards their own. You can't get your head around it. I just can't get my head around how humans are so cruel and so barbaric. And instead of looking after each other, we tend to find every excuse not to take land, to not share, you just feel that we're on the tipping point with climate change. You just think, wow, they're invading, Russia's invading Ukraine, but you think, why aren't they looking after the climate? Don't invade another country, we should be working on climate, helping the earth get better and survive. And I actually boil it down to money. I actually think everyone's out. It's all about capitalism. It's all about the dollar. It's about oil. It's about stock markets. It's about everything. But looking after the planet, having children. We are really up at a tipping point, and it makes you wonder if we have got enough time to save the climate, because they want 1.5. I think we're well over that. When you look at all the floods around the world in, India, Afghanistan, everywhere, in Australia, all across central Australia, everyone's being washed away. If you can't see it and you don't do anything about it, it's insane. We are humans. We are actually just wiping ourselves out. We are choosing to wipe ourselves out. I always say to my husband, if you can put man on the moon in 1968 and take 9 months to build like a tin can to put what's his name on the moon, surely you can work out renewables and oil and put your money into, and there's no will. There's no will for us to change. It's all about the big oil, the big money, the Donald Trumps of the world, the Putins, It's about contraception. Let women rule the world. No one wants to have 10 kids, it just drives me crazy when I look at it. So a lot of my work's about all that sort of stuff. I do it in all different textiles, all mediums, talk everything like Teena. This work here, which is a little small painting, which is called Blue, and it looks like a nice, it's a nice little painting, but actually it's about one shoe and one handbag, and it's about, we consume so many pairs of shoes, and we buy so many handbags, and it's not a criticism of women, it's more about the culture. You can only wear one pair of shoes at a time, and you can only have one bag. Stop buying crap, and that's what that. So really nice little sweet painting, but it's actually about consumerism. It's about, hello, wake up Australia, do we need to keep buying cheap, crappy clothes and have women anybody in these sweatshops not paying them, and there's so many issues as an artist. I'm stuck in every issue. But I do tend to focus on, spend 3 years focusing on one thing, and I'll do it in different mediums, and anyway, I'm just angry actually. You need to have anger, you need to speak out. People are too afraid to speak out. You have to voice it and say it. This isn't good enough. And people are afraid, and they're afraid. Because it's like Nancy Pelosi's husband goes and gets shot in the leg, or someone goes and attacks him because she's trying to say, no, let's, you know, our vote counted. We got in. Don't attack the Americans. Don't attack democracy. If we lose American democracy, we're all screwed. Let's face it.
We are screwed, really, especially since they made us a target this week.
Yeah, that's right. Why can't we live in peace? Why can't South Korea talk to North Korea? Why does China want to invade Taiwan? Why can't you just live in peace? Why can't we have a ticker? Why can't we tick a box? Our Indigenous population have a voice in Parliament. Why is it so difficult? I get it. Every morning I wake up and I go, I'm so angry about it. And I'm not angry. I'm not angry, but I'm angry too.
And we should be angry.
Yeah,
Anger is like your intelligence is
we're
working.
quite happy to wipe out all our flora and fauna, and then you go on an aeroplane and you see a giant tiger on a screen instead of having them out in the wood. Instead, we're just going to have our animals on screens. Oh, that used to be a tiger. That used to be an
Now
elephant.
getting extinct.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like the koalas are dying.
Yeah, they're losing all their pathways.
But you'll see a lovely ad come to Australia. You know,
Cuddling
we've got
koalas.
koalas, you know,
Yeah.
cuddle one, you know, have the experience of Australia.
I mean, you can't help but get few. Everything makes me angry. I'm actually a really kind person. I shut my mouth all the time.
Everyone should be angry.
Oh, yeah, I can't. Anyway, that's a diatribe.
Laurie's not angry.
What did you say?
Lawrence is not angry. He's just quiet.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
let's take
What's that?
No, I think
enjoy the
No.
anger.
yeah, well, it's not just spouting it.
And then, Lawrence, it's your turn, and if you know what to talk about your.
Well, you know, I know we're living in an agitated world, you know. We can't collectively seem to solve the problems, politically or otherwise, you know. Often I wake up and say, let me hear the good news. I've heard the bad news several times. Let me hear the good news, you know, because the good news sometimes can be infectious and, you know, clean up the mess, as it were. So really, I don't know, Susan. I'm going back to Vegas on Thursday night, and I haven't got a clue what to expect. You know, I mean, I read the same things you do about the midterms and the Trump and everything else, and crime and the homelessness and everything else. I have not. Well, I have only the stuff that I hear from like everybody else here. So I have to go in there because partly it's one of the places that I chose to commit myself. I've actually bought a house which acted as my storage in Vegas, and I did the same thing in Beijing. I leased a place there, and until the pandemic, I was quite happy between the three places, and you know, the pandemic, of course, put a stop to it, and to be honest, I don't know where I am now. You know, I'm totally tripped up because of all the things that you were talking about, all the things that all you guys are talking about. It's an awful world, it seems, you know, we live in, and nothing we can do about it, you know. It's, you can protest, you get arrested if you're lucky, you know, or something like that. So, as Vivian said, I'm not really, in that sense, an activist with a capital A, but my work has been a commentary about what I see, you know, and I think the fact that I'm included in a lot of shows, for example, in China by Chinese curators, usually in the company of other Chinese nationalists who are used to working in a contemporary vein about China. But me, I'm sort of a foreigner with less knowledge than the locals, but somehow, because of the language concerns, I'm included in the show because I think maybe they think I might add something to the equation. And the work that's in this show is one of those things. My work is that the white boy and girl, gin and gin, which is to do with a commitment, a friendship, or a commitment to do with not necessarily a sexual or romantic commitment, but a commitment to other fellow human beings. And it was born from a toy that no longer exists in Beijing. Well, the thing is about these works, I'm in total admiration of people who can, continually produce, like, the thing is, what I like is music, is the other thing. Music is about as focused and concentrated in terms emotionally, spiritually, whatever you like to call it, being able to hit the mark, whether it's opinion, whether it's whatever, and for people to be able to produce constantly, one after the other, and make a new statement about the world we live in. I think that's remarkable. But for me, just going back to this piece, sometimes a work or a thought arrests me to the point where, there's no point. I can't put a blue stripe around there just to make it, whatever, more relevant. It's just, I think I need to be quiet and look at it, and I need to absorb what I've done. Because, like people here have said, you produce because, something has gone before what you're able to think. It's actually happened before your eyes, and sometimes, Tony, it's not something that you've brushed the canvas. It suddenly materializes before you, and it's not all your own doing. It's something else. Well, for me, it takes me a long time to absorb that. And I don't know how it's happened, but by crikey, it's happened. So I have to try and. Everybody else is trying to read it, but some things, of course, will exist for a long time. They will reverberate for a long time. Other things, maybe not. But I'm now going back to Vegas after 3 years' absence to see what's going on there. I mean, I read about it. People get catalytic converters stolen, they get mail stolen. Homelessness happens in many big cities. And I've got a dear friend in Vegas now who's homeless, and I don't know exactly what I can do about it, but I've got to go back and find out, So in terms of, I think we're all feeling a little bit helpless because all this is happening to us, and it's the big powers, the big money end, that's calling the shots, and we're disgusted, we think, well, fuck, give me a break, let me do something about this. And we can't. So that's what it is, I think.
But your work is about communication and language and the slippage of language. And so what I see is your great thing is, and I understand why they include you, because you are always trying to bridge that understanding. You're always trying to, with Jin, 62 interpretations of the same word, depending on intonation. And your Babel, Tower of Babel, it's all about communication.
Well, thank you. The thing I'm still intrigued about is the Zhengyu, or the 4-character Chinese idiom, which was inculcated way back, centuries ago, but they still apply, The wisdom that's I suppose concocted, that was, a cross-section way back, it still applies now because, I'm actually working with the Shoalhaven community at the moment, which is largely First Nations, and they're talking about law and lore, and trying to understand the stories of the Shoalhaven River, and I'm trying to link that with what I've learned in China, about the past. So, and it's interesting that, for example, the very young people have actually carrying the stories of the river into our conversation have said that, you know, basically the global element of what Aboriginal culture represents is still being understood, you know, being understood. So anyway, I find that to be very interesting union of possibilities. I think that's all I think.
Thanks, Lawrence. I think sort of that it's increasingly tough for artists to work out how to respond. You know, we live in a world without isms anymore, without ideologies anymore. Capitalism seems to have overtaken democracy, and we live in a very peculiar times. I mean, we hear that all the time, but I think we're on the brink of a major transition on every aspect and every condition of our world. And I think this is baffling not only for politicians and people at large, but after certainties that art gave us, I think that we're also baffled how to respond. We don't know how to find that crack to get a grip in order to engage. And I think this is actually confronting a lot of artists today. How do we renegotiate the idea that art matters and that art is important in not only the prosecution of everyday life, but how it infects the ideas that we live our everyday life with. And that's so, and that trying to find that grip, that foothold, I think is something that's extremely difficult now. You know, but we'll go more into it.
Can I say something about that, Nick?
Yeah.
You know, regarding what you're just saying, is it's funny how all these activists are now going into art galleries and, you know, spraying art, which is, you know, the Van Gogh. Oh, okay, sorry.
So about that very issue.
Oh, okay.
And that. But our last speaker is with us, who's also been sitting here quietly, and after having seen his last exhibition here, I know he has a lot to say. He thinks very deeply about his work.
Oh, thank you, Nick. I started off as an architect, but I dropped out to become a playwright. But I couldn't make a living from being a playwright. But I took photos, and so I transformed into a freelance photographer. And I was able to pay the rent, taking photographs. People would pay me money, and that's how and if I could do it, that's how I earned my money. Then, this was in the 70s. In 1974, the Australian Centre for Photography came into being, and I suppose officially, photography became a bona fide art practice. It was the new kid on the block, and it was fashionable as well. And most of the photographers at that time were like me. We had a photographic practice. We'd take photographs, but we had amongst our photographs exhibition photographs, which kind of told a story. And most of us were like that. We were not artists per se. We were not commercial photographers or fashion photographers. I struggled as a freelance photographer, and then in the 80s I started to project my images and talk with them, add music to them, and I made them into performances. And that was very successful for me because no one else was doing it this way, and I had I toured the world many times for 15 years doing my performances, monologues with slide projection. And they're probably, I think that they're my most, if I'm to do a major work, it would be in a performance. And it spills out into an exhibition that selected photographs I can put up on the wall. And I also realised that a lot of the photographs had a story to them. And so in the 90s, I just wrote the story straight onto the photograph. And that was very successful. And in fact, I realised then that that is really my signature, is the written work. And so I've kept doing that. I used to photograph celebrities, society, but then I started to photograph the gay community, which I was very actively connected with. And after that, I always say I came out as a Chinese, and I photographed the Australian Chinese, or the Chinese Australians, and eventually I went over to China, and that's the more or less the end of that chapter. So those those three things: artistic society, gay, LGBTIQ society, and Asian identity. They're the three big themes of my work. And recently I had a retrospective exhibition at Quagoma in Brisbane, which was very successful, and I was thrilled to actually have institutional help to put my photos on the wall in a coherent way, and I could see my story on the walls and how it played out. So I was very happy with that. So in some ways, as an artist, I'm fulfilled, and I want to acknowledge that, because we're all artists seek recognition in some way. So of course, you always want more, but I've had a good share of being on fulfillment. I always think of the camera. The camera captures a moment in time. You don't have to do anything special for that to happen. Just press the shutter. And it freezes a moment of time. And because the world changes and moves on, these moments can never come again. So if you just keep going out and photographing, you build up a collection. And later, it's only much later that I sort through them and work out what the photographs are about, really, or what has happened. And the changes in society can be subtle. For example, in the gay community, we've had gay liberation, AIDS, gender, whatever. And when I look at my photographs, I can somehow see that the current trend is trans. That's the thing that's captured everybody's imagination. And so once I've realised that, then I can focus on all the trans people that I meet, and so that's the way I build up a collection. But I'm more interested now, because I'm reaching the end of my career, I'm more interested in my archive, which is kind of like a unique photographic thing, because I don't think painters have this peculiar problem. But it's working out how to preserve your archive and make sure it's safe or it lives on. So I don't take that many new photographs. So I take a few, but I'm more interested in remixing my old photographs, going through them and pulling out different stories. So yes, that's where I'm at.
Where's your photograph?
It's the one, the
Green.
dancing one, Teena, 1980. Yeah.
I'm happy to see that one, William.
Oh, the colours.
So many great memories.
So that's a kind of about a performance piece, but also it's got Meryl Tankard in it too. So that's she's a huge figure in dance, and yes.
So many other famous people, though, you've captured so well. Do you know?
A spectacular moment, though, in Australia for that company to see that those performances. People were changed. They came out of theatres changed after that. I think it's very important.
I think
Yeah.
it changed my
It-
idea
it
about
sure did.
dance, which I
Yeah.
never ever liked before,
Yeah.
and then to see its possibility.
Mm.
It's actually
it's a
dance.
great moment.
It's dance theatre, so strictly speaking, it's not dance.
Okay. Thank you, William.
Teena, lovely.
It's really interesting when you have the opportunity like today to listen to 6 artists discussing their work, and you look at the work and it's so different to each other, but something underneath it, behind it, in between the gasps and the lines, there's something that a lot of artists connect with. And I was thinking about that and I was reading one of my many art online things which you probably get hypoallergic.
Yes.
And in it, the other day said, these times are fraught with division, anxiety and discord, and it is so exhausting, particularly coming out of COVID. But remember this, no matter what happens, we will always have art. And I found it really interesting because, I hear the anger, I hear the anxiety, I hear the loss of focus on an uncertain future, and it's sort of like still there is this basis of art that we, like Vivian said, that we communicate with, another language that sort of slips in between institutions and politics and so on, and that art actually matters. And I also, listening to everything here, was that regardless, even Tony, you said that your work is about, it's not political, it's not socially engaged, but even in its absence of social engagement, it is socially engaged because you're choosing a landscape, and one of the issues that's confronting everybody here, everybody outside, everybody overseas, is this notion of the environment and what is disappearing so fast. And so how we engage it, whether it's the things that you capture within, and you captured generation in change, you captured the mobility of a society that changed its perceptions of the significance of the queer community, and you paraded it out front with your art practice. You put it front and centre, and you did something more than that. You linked it to your Chineseness, which is what Lawrence is doing as well. He's linking it to some memory of a past. And these things matter. It's how we are actually reconfiguring the world without necessarily knowing exactly what we're reconfiguring. And in thinking about that, like those, the recent COP27 climate conference in Egypt, at its midpoint on Friday, bad news arrived. which was a startling report that international group of scientists confirmed that the CO2 emissions are rising faster than expected, and the Earth it's balanced on the brink. It has a 50% chance of crossing the crucial temperature threshold this decade, which was announced at 1.5 degrees, warming to pre-industrial times. This suggests that catastrophic planetary damage awaits us. You know, this is really, when you think about it, it's so sobering, you know, and I hear the anger, I hear the frustration. It's not just the cultural frustration of the loss of the tree, it's far deeper. It's a bigger message that's going out, that some things are expendable in a society that doesn't value these things. And when we don't value these things, we are at a great loss. And, you know, these are the things that, you know, that now that, you know, the question is, how can art respond to these issues? And should artists engage with and claim some responsibility to redress this climate disaster, which is approaching us faster than ever before? And, you know, going back to your point, Suzanne, of the activists who are, you know, gluing themselves and giving appearance of damaging, you know, work. Why art? You know, that's what struck me that I started thinking about. Why art? And then it dawned on me that, you know, somehow, whether we like it or not, we value art.
But can I say something?
Yeah.
The artwork that they're putting their marks on are not the local gallery where they've just got art. It's the artwork that's worth $200 million, or it's
Because it is worth that, and that means a lot.
It's not about art.
It's the preciousness of art,
Yes.
and the value commodity.
Yes,
of art.
commodity.
But you know, it's interesting. I was watching a doco the other day, and a woman was saying, you know, they had a Da Vinci in a gallery somewhere in Europe, and it was up there for a year and a year. After they had rows and rows of people walking past, really keen to see this painting, and then suddenly a guy came and said, well, actually, that's not really a Da Vinci, that's someone else. Suddenly that artwork was put down in the bowels of the museum. So it's actually perception of how we see art. It's actually not even, it's more than just the art. It's about the money, you know.
It's about the money attached to the idea, and where I was leading to is exactly that point.
Yeah.
Because the leading directors of national institutions around the world, they signed a memorandum, an agreement, decrying these attacks. They said the attacks in Madrid on Goya were really disgusting, on Van Gogh and so on, were you know, terrible and that. But what were they actually talking about?
So that's really the
You know, they were
commodification.
talking about the pricelessness of it and its value to history, but whose history? You know, the questions that get asked. And that these priceless masterpieces, you know, what they do is they serve a process of perpetuating bankrupt notions that museums are apolitical spaces, that museums themselves are repositories of knowledge, and that we don't look at how knowledge is valued, it's just the pricelessness of them.
There's two things that are really important, is the commodification of that particular art, and also its curation.
Absolutely.
Right? And I must say that it must be quite a big dilemma. The dilemma that you're talking about that artists are facing, they're probably similar questions and choices that curators and museums are facing. Right?
I think that the directors are talking about something different. They're talking about you know, that the museum should be outside the political process, should not be part of it. that they are apolitical spaces for repository of knowledge.
How can they be?
And the question is, how can they be? And I think what the activists, climate activists, are doing is actually going to the very heart of what a community regards as important, valuable, things that transcend history, that transcend everything else, that, you know, looking at Van Gogh should not have a political attitude attached to it. And there's something very absurd with it, because, you know, when we look at the market of exchange of art, the top end is actually, you know, sort of like where the main transactions of billions of dollars of exchange are taking place. And this is sort of, and my question is, how can they not be political? How can they not be sort of like immune to the terror of the society that we live in? So I sort of like agree with those activists. I don't think, you know, there's, you know, of course there's Van Gogh is valuable, but I don't think that it sits outside the problem. And the problem that we have now is how do we, you know, if it does, that means that museums are safe houses for all sorts of things. They are not about, you know, and we all already know that institutional change is very slow and backward, etc. But these curated packages of the museums, the argument of these directors is that they should be immune from what's going on around the world.
They're well chosen, Nick. I mean, the choosing of Goya would be supporting those activists. That's what he was. Van Gogh is a person who had no power, mental health. These are the right.
And an environmentalist. See, Van Gogh is
yes.
right now. He's saying, please.
So they're well chosen.
Put all my work, sell all my work, and put it into
That's it.
renewables and
That's
and,
right.
and,
That's
and
exactly
environment, etc., etc. So
I mean, this
so
guy
it's
died.
it's a kind of a good marriage.
Yeah, they're brilliant choices, and that's I applaud them for that.
That's the issue, and that is that the works are not outside the discourse of the environment. And I was going to ask William here that in a parallel argument, you know, the you know, thinking back to when Mardi Gras first started and the aggression by the cops and by the community, the same aggression that still continues to our Indigenous people today, that level of violence that took place, you know, how do you think you as an artist and possibly Teena as well, you know, like how do you engage, how do you sort of see your practice in relation to those histories, and in a way that your practice reveals those histories because you wrote it all down, whether it was the cultural one or the big one.
So what was your question, Nick?
As an artist, how do you engage that? Do you see yourself as a socially engaged artist, and how do you engage it?
Yes, I identify with the group, and I'm a storyteller really, and I try to tell the story of just how I see it. And in terms of activism, the main activism, LGBTQI, was in the 70s and the 80s, where homosexuality was criminal. So that's a big thing to protest against. And so I say that there's a time when you have to shout and stamp your foot and throw things, burn things or something, just to be heard. But then after that, the strongest thing I think is to be visible, so that through the media and through one's daily life, if you're visible and say, here I am, eventually, as it's happened in Australia, people have accepted you by and large. certainly a lot more than 50 years ago.
Oh, we got the yes vote.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got the yes vote, but then I'm reminded about their young boy that was killed just recently, you know, like the unevenness of that acceptance in our society, what's accessibly acceptable and what is still not acceptable. And I think sort of Aboriginality and raciality are still yet to be fought. They're still being fought out, and it gets accepted in pockets, but then in other pockets, you know, the same crisis continues.
Yes,
It's
a
not
high
even.
percent. Yes, a high percent. Well, it was roughly 2 to 1, like the vote.
Mhm.
So that means that there's a third out there who's against you still. So the enemy's still there. Is the way I see it.
Well, absolutely. I was thinking when Lawrence was talking about going back to LA, you know, the Republicans won LA, and the issues are what will happen now, right, within the LA area. And so things are not sorted out, things are not even. You know, I think the problems, whether it's environment or ethnicity or culture, they are still battlegrounds. And you know, I think that yes, we can make art about them, but does art sort of have to serve another function on top of itself? That's the question.
That's a question.
Could you say it again?
Does art need another function on top of itself, its aesthetic self,
Yeah.
in order to sort of like meet the challenges of today and tomorrow?
I don't know how it can though. How can it? Of just a, you know, a two-dimensional thing or a piece of music. I don't know. All it can do maybe is to make us think and feel. That will hopefully, if we've got any intelligence and compassion, connect us to that. And if it can do that, which, you know, if someone's accessible to that, it can do that. But sadly, not everyone is, you know, not everyone is. And for those that aren't, I don't know, shut them up in a gallery for 3 weeks, lock the door, play
Yeah, that won't do
Chopin,
it.
play Chopin, make them see the visual. Because I don't know, other than being an activist, you know, like actively an activist, which, you know, I'm paid too, and sometimes I'm working and I'm thinking, if I were younger, I don't know what I could do, if I could actually justify, but now I can justify it because I'm tired. But if I was younger, I don't think that I could justify it because of its relative lacking of burning, literally burning, screaming, you know,
Can I say
shouting.
that for some strange reason, I had trouble getting a burn on my work, which is, by the way, the ghost of the ghost gun. I tried to get it to levitate. Unfortunately, there's a bolt there, but it's slightly levitating. But yeah, just that thing that I chipped away at this, I overworked, I brought it back. In the middle of the night, I'd get up and I'd run my nails through it. You know what I mean? Like, I was almost screaming at this sculpture that I was wrestling with. That would take me 2 years to figure out. No, I seen that bit, which was, you know, a mistake, an experiment, a piece of my art. I couldn't get over it, I ended up becoming the very pyromaniac that fucking happened to it. I'm like, I can't get the burn right. Doesn't matter how much charcoal, how much Black Conti crown I get on this tree. She won't fucking burn. And I end up a pyromaniac in the middle of the night, getting matches, getting my lighter, trying to burn the fucking tree. to get the shades of grey right, to try and make it look dead. But it came together on the last night. In fact, my nails weren't the same after, so I was using my thumb to really get the song lines at the back of the tree.
What material is it?
Oh no, it's so loud.
So many.
No,
It's
well,
not wood, is it?
Yes, it is.
I
There's so many layers in this work. Sorry. I just want to say, she starts with Jesus, who I believe in God. Yeah? Many, essentially country, the goddess, right? I start with Jesus throwing things around the village, angry, those palms, right? At the people making money. I find a palm drop on the street, I soak it for about a week, I then get rope, and then rope the thing, right? I get a friend, I need encaustic. I've never done encaustic wax. I went to Costa, everything was conceptual. If I'd gone to National Art School, I would have learned how to fucking do it. So I get a friend, I must do encaustic wax. I must learn this thing, right? To add to the fact I do everything. Sorry, I don't mean to sound like a wanker, I'm just saying I do so many. Yeah, all of it, I try to do all of it, yeah. Now compare it to music, because great orchestras are along the same vibe as these great masters we're talking about. I try and achieve, especially in my self-portraits, an aura that they talk about. A great orchestra has the same tune and vibe of a great painting, that it works along that same line. It gives you an aura, a good feeling. Now, as an Aboriginal artist, I believe I'm fully political. I think Aboriginal art is, I'll rip off Richard Bell here, it's a political act. All of my work is political. Every single thing I do is political. I'm compelled to do it. I have to do it, like working on that tree for 2 years. Simon rings me, have you got anything for the show? And I'm like, oh, the Christmas show. Oh, it's early. Hang on, I'll just finish this. Next day he picks it up. So I got it together at the last minute, but... Okay, sorry, your question. Plant, soaked, Jesus wood, roped, encaustic wax, layers of white ochre, layers of white acrylic, more encaustic wax, more white ochre, and then I fill the thing. I find an 1800s book, which the cover was so fucked I couldn't see who'd written it, right? Because it's 1800s and it's naturally aged. The history of Britain. So I then start making layers of the history of Britain inside it and outside it. I hit it with encaustic wax again. I hit it with white ochre again. Sorry, I just keep going. I use charcoal from the desert, from the Northern Territory that I've had permission to use. I use that. Then I'm like, it's not strong enough. Jesus, I go and buy a black Pontic crown the next day. I hit it with a black Pontic crown, slightly overworked it. No! I'm screaming again in the middle of the night. I've got to pull this thing back. I've got to fucking pull back the fire whilst adding it. You know? Fucking giant matches in the middle of the night, 3 a.m, burning this tree going, why won't you burn? You've got wood, you've got aged paper in there. It wouldn't burn. That's it. So that's experimental as anything.
You were about to say something.
I was just reflecting on your question about the function, and especially when it comes to if you really sort of approaching art to affect some form of activism. The question is whether really art in galleries and museums, other than what was done by those activists, really, your work itself, whether there's any sort of better platforms and better media to do this with. And I think that, for instance, social media is really kind of, to me, a lot more powerful and effective because it's reaching so many people, and there is so much churn, and people's attention spans are so quickly short.
I disagree. Sorry. Sorry.
I think that the problem with art as a voice today is that people aren't listening. They're not even looking.
Yeah, it demands time.
Because I actually think people don't. I think in a country like Australia, people don't really care. If you say to someone, "I'm an artist," they say, "Well, what else?" You know.
You're a labour. You're a labour.
I think more people.
They are, but my point about the whole thing. My point about the whole thing is that talk to a couple of Aboriginal footballers. They have more say in what's happening in Australian culture than any artist. Or talk to Adam Goods, who I think
was
sport,
called a fucking monkey.
I think sport. I think that the power of sport these days. It's like the basketball. Who Gina Lightenhart, they just dumped all the power of sport these days, which goes all around the world, which is international. That's what people. That's where they get their. That's where people start to think, oh, that girl's gay. She can be in the team. They're all. Do you know what I mean? I think that there's a much broader scope with social media, and I actually think sport is actually a really big voice these days.
It's just about how many people know you as opposed to anything else.
Lawrence, you work a lot with new media practices. What do you?
Well, just while people were talking then, I thought sometimes it's better to do nothing.
Yes.
Just instead of adding all this stuff, how about just stand back a bit and do nothing? Like for me, travel is sometimes observation, which means non-activity, non-activist. It's just absorbing, and looking at things, and I think.
Can you imagine how good the world would be if everybody did nothing? There'd be peace, there'd be harmony, there'd be heaven.
But we're burned to
Let's all
death.
do nothing.
I'm not
There's so
sure
much
I'd go along
cruelty
with
and
that.
destruction that you feel like even with this small amount that you can do with your voice, I think it's like a vote. It's like that we're all together as a rising tide. If I choose to actually still go out and say it, even if the voice is very small, because every single amount of energy and effort and intention counts collectively for all of us. It's apropos sort of, well, what are we doing now with this period of change? I've consciously decided that I've learned certain techniques and mediums, and I'm going to use the art as a way to beckon in, and if it can just change the view or provokes the thought of 1, 2, 3 people, that's important right now.
I think young people are the rising tide, and I think they care about art. I think they, I see that engagement. They don't engage in the same way that we perhaps do. I mean, we are the problem. And so it's young people, and I see the way that they're responding, and they are very committed to that. They're the ones going to galleries, they're the ones who are engaging. I feel quite optimistic with that. But for Nicholas, has always been an activist, is always the work that you've produced has always been directed to change and to addressing, wrongs, etc. I mean, how do you see this great time of rupture? It is about rupture. This is what we're experiencing.
I think it's more than rupture. I think what I mentioned a little while ago is that with the end of all the isms, they don't exist anymore. Theory has almost just political theory has almost been vacated from the field of discourse, and that the reality is that I think that they've reached a natural natural conclusion, but at the same time, I also think that the speed of change that is taking over the world at the moment is faster than we're able to think of, and that even the most radical end of thinking is well and truly behind this thing called change. And the problem is, how do you apprehend it as an artist, as a curator, as a writer, as a thinker? It's particularly when in these less than democratic times, the powerlessness of people has increased many times, and which is a point that I think that Lawrence was saying a bit earlier, and that now but it can change in pockets, and you know, because I think the work that William has done over the period has almost stood like a beacon of change, right? And that the queer world is a lot more accepted now than it's ever been before. But in the cultural discourse, the work dealing with queer and ethnicity, that's also changed as dramatically. And I think that visibility that we were talking about a bit earlier, whether it's in social media or in galleries, and I think you're right, Vivian, that there's a total loss of faith with our generation, unfortunately, and that loss of faith amongst different generations is possibly where new ideas will spring from, and that type of experimentation. And it may take place in areas we haven't even considered, right? And you know, because I think of what you captured there with Pina Bausch and the developments that she made that shook the dance theatre world to its very core. It challenged what we understood dance to be, and that was in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, and that it changed forms. I think art still has that capacity, but we are being undermined constantly by institutions. I think that the art world has actually lost the plot with collectors overtaking the control of the art world, and institutions are paying to the big dollar, and so that sort of cuts out this idea of experimentation. It cuts out this idea where activism is only acceptable when it's given permission to, and then it's not activism. And so these are the problems that I think confront the art world, and we haven't solved them yet. But maybe that's a good point to
go.
finish.
Yeah. We can't be too befuddled by all this, because it seems like, just being in the audience and everyone's very downhearted by... But the thing is...
No,
sorry?
I disagree with that, because it might seem down.
Well, yeah, but I hope it doesn't.
I think the fact that you're naming the problem...
Naming the problems, that's right.
Foucault said, once you name the problem, you identify it, and you know what the issues are.
Yes, that's exactly right.
That's where we are at the moment. We're naming the problem, but we don't have a solution for it. But the
solution would be, as Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Or imagination encircles the world. And it's up to us artists to just keep imagining. And if that sounds simplistic, we just have to do that, because we can get dragged down by social issues, but we can also reimagine, hopefully, and whether we do it as older people or whether the younger artists do it, it's there in its kernel, I'd say.
But the world's always changing. Look at the Second World War. Look what's happened then.
It is the speed of change.
Look
now.
at the
Third World War.
But I think what's happening is technology is just zooming ahead in humanity. Technology is just moving so quickly that people, it's like the Medibank private thing where people's, you know, all their data's come out and all this, you know, everything's so uncertain, you know, like it's you know, is someone going to get into my bank account because I can get into the phone? Your phone now is a tracking device for everything. I think people are really...
We're like zombies. You get on the train and
so
every
much.
single person is just on a mobile, like we've become something out of 1984.
But everybody knows.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
wherever you are, they
we
know.
are now absorbed.
You can live in your house and the
that.
police can send you a message, or there's I mean, we often get it where we live, or there's a man that's just gone missing. You know, has anyone seen? And that's, I think that's great, because that is that's a service to help people. But to know that someone can track you or listen to you.
Hey, facial recognition now, when you go into Bunnings.
And we haven't even touched on...
What happens?
Well, they're clever, and I'll just
You walk
quote
in
him,
and
that you get facial recognition.
What do they do with that?
Exactly, this is my point, and there's a very good friend of mine called Atrium. Now he's just done the most brilliant show. I mean, he just does one after the other, right, this guy. But he just did one on facial recognition at the Commercial Gallery. Clever. The guy goes into Bunnings. Right? He goes into Bunnings. Bring it on. Facial recognition, me, right? Activist, of course, but genius artist, I think. I just admire his way of thought, which is always political. He's just done a deaths in custody thing up in Queensland of people's Anyway, sorry, I was jumping from one work to another. We'll go back to
do that
skin.
afterwards, because I'm going to
Sorry, but just that facial recognition thing. It's frightening. Do you know what I mean?
We haven't even touched on education.
Sorry?
We haven't even touched on education.
Well, this thing about skin.
All right, I'm going to close it off.
To be continued.
Stand up for a bit.